So, adding some additional discussion about this potential rocket strike by Russia into Polish territory and what it potentially could be and what it could lead to. Now, obviously, Poland is a NATO country. 2 Polish citizens were killed, and an investigation is ongoing. So, the way I see this taking place is I don't think Article 5 will be invoked. What I do think is Article 4 will be invoked. And for those of you that don't know what Article 4 is, it is where parties to NATO will consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of the NATO countries, the territorial integrity, political independence, or security of the parties is threatened. Obviously, the territorial integrity and security of Poland was threatened, so that obviously could invoke an Article 4 call here. Determining whether this was deliberate or not will lead to potentially an Article 5 discussion. It does, however, allow for Poland at the very least to argue with NATO members to escalate air defense systems for Ukraine, to potentially give systems that act as counter battery fire or even longer range missiles such as ATACMS. Now, Hungary has convened its defense council over the missiles landing in Poland. Lithuania has come forward in support of Poland's potential ask of Article 5. But there are 4 scenarios that I see right here that we need to consider before this there's potentially a discussion of Article 5 going forward. The first is, was this a deliberate attack? The argument that people would have to say that it is a deliberate attack is, if it was 2 rockets, the likelihood of 2 malfunctioning rockets hitting the same target is pretty extraordinary. They potentially could be testing NATO's will, but there's the issue with saying they're testing NATO's will here is the ambiguity of the attack. And if Russia was wanting to test the will of NATO, you would think that they'd want to attack something that's less ambiguous, because now there's confusion, there's discussion as to whether this was just a stray rocket or some other scenario, and that undermines the idea that Russia would be testing NATO. Another potential scenario is it was an accident. There was maybe an operator error in targetry, meaning that the rocket was fired, hit the target that was intended, but the person who entered the target was incorrect. This has happened quite often. In fact, there's been malfunctions as well. Could Russia use this as an excuse? It was a rocket malfunction. It was operator error. I mean, the generally poor performance of Russian military equipment helps support that idea. In fact, if you remember earlier in the war, a Russian drone landed in Croatia, crashing and causing an uproar. So, not necessarily sure it was an accident, because, again, 2 malfunctioning missiles simultaneously hitting, it could have been operator error in targetry or some other situation. Now, the next potential thought process as to what could have happened comes from the Ukrainian side. And it's 2 separate lines of thinking that kind of form the same conclusion, in that it was Ukrainian air defense missiles intercepting Russian rockets, and they either missed or they successfully intercepted. And if they missed, they landed in this farm, causing this damage and death, or they were successful in intercepting the missile, which is why there's 2 potential rockets on the ground. One could have been debris from the Russian rocket, the other could have been debris from the intercept vehicle, the intercept missile. So both entirely plausible. Both entirely plausible that there was an intercept, and the wreckage from the shoot down, and the remains of both rockets fell down onto this very unfortunate farm. And a Polish reporter says that his sources say it was most likely the remains of a Russian rocket shot down by the armed forces of Ukraine, but the U.S. is being tight-lipped about it. Now, interestingly, Poland has a RAT-31DL radar, which is and it's stationed about 40 to 50 kilometers away from where this would have taken place. That radar has a range of 500 kilometers. If that radar was running, Poland and NATO already knew the answer. The other question is Poland apparently scrambled fighters, meaning they likely picked up the trajectory of the rocket early on. So again, potentially could have been deliberate. Not entirely sure, or again, it could have been an accident in targetry, scrambling fighters, etc., because it was heading towards Polish territory. Regardless, the only word coming out of the Kremlin or anything remotely close to Russia is a Russian editor talking about on Twitter, he's being kind of a troll about it, saying that, talking to the Polish government, saying, is that how you want it? It's basically saying, this is what you get. So again, not 100% sure those are the scenarios that it looks like. A lot of discussion has to come out about whether this is a deliberate attack. I believe Article 4 will be invoked, which means they will just have a consultation and a meeting together to discuss what took place. This potentially could have some implications to support Ukraine in their wish to have ATACMS, potentially elevating their air defense capabilities, or some other scenarios potentially with causing more pain on Russia with regard to additional sanctions. But the bottom line is 2 Polish citizens were killed, potentially by Russian rockets, and it's similar to how police work in that if a stray bullet fired by a police officer kills someone in a gunfight with a criminal, the criminal is charged with that crime. So theoretically, if Russia fires a rocket and Ukraine moves to intercept it, that intercept causes the death of someone in Poland, it would be deemed Russia's fault for conducting the initial attack. Again, we'll see where that leads, but that's kind of where it's looking right now and where the discussion can be had.